Hello everyone, welcome to Mr. Noctory. Today, we're arriving in Norway. It's a winter morning in the year 1273, and the cold out there doesn't just want to bite your toes. It wants to gnaw away at whatever willpower you used to have. No heating, no leftovers, only snow, chimney smoke, and your grandmother's voice whispering by the fire inside a torftaksstue, that's a turf-roofed wooden hut, wearing wool, and more wool, rough, itchy, and never dry, when it's -4 degrees Fahrenheit. Before we begin, if you genuinely find this a peaceful place to hide at night, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you truly want to. Like the old tavern rule, you stay only if you need a quiet seat. And you know what I love most? Reading the comments and seeing where you're from and what time it is now. Whether it's New York or Norway, 1 or 5 in the morning, you're still here, and I see you. Now, dim the lights. Turn on the little fan if you have one, not for the heat, but for that soft humming sound. Maybe you can't sleep because of a deadline, or the sound of a garbage truck outside, or simply because your heart won't quiet down at night. Or maybe you just dreamed of falling into a place covered in snow, a place where the bed is moss, the blanket is goatskin, and the wind whispers like the voice of someone long gone. You're in Norway, winter, the year 1273. You're not a warrior, not a Viking, no axe, no horse, no reason to be remembered in the history books. You're just Eva, 14 years old, living with your mother, your grandmother, and 3 goats, 2 alive, 1 hanging over the hearth. You just woke up from the cold, not the "my fingers are a little chilly" modern kind, but the kind of cold that makes even your thoughts want to crawl somewhere and hide. You open your eyes and see the moss-covered roof, dripping with frozen condensation. You see your breath turn to smoke. You hear your grandmother shift, and then cough dryly. Nobody speaks, because speaking loses heat. You reach your hand out from under the itchy wool and animal skins, and immediately regret it. Your skin touches the air like it's brushing against a blade of ice. But you can't lie there. You have to get up. You have to light the fire. If not, your mother won't wake up in the morning. You drag yourself out of the illusion of warmth and begin a day with no sun. And you know what's strange? This happens every morning. And you, even though you're still small, you survive. Why? Because if you don't survive, no one will remember your name. And in this century, not being remembered is almost like dying a second time. Still feel like going back to sleep. Calling it a home sounds optimistic. Really, if you stood a coffin upright, smeared mud on the outside, and stuffed a few people and goats inside, you'd have yourself a 13th century Norwegian house. They called it a torftaksstue, a turf-roofed wooden hut. From a distance, it looked like a patch of land growing a beard. Up close, you wished you hadn't looked. The walls were rough pine logs, pieced together from forest trees, plastered with soil mixed with animal dung to block the wind. Dung, yes, dung, was the best insulation poor people ever had. Every gap between the logs was crammed with dry moss, both to stop the draft and to give mice a place to crawl through. The roof was made of grass, grown with rainwater and urine. Each year, your family had to climb up there, patch soil, weed it, repair tiers, like raising a mute child. Whenever snow piled up, the whole family climbed onto the roof, shoveling each load of snow like slow-motion death sentences. If you slipped, you didn't fall to the ground. You fell into the goat pen, and you think a leaky roof is unlucky. No. If it's not leaking, it means the snow already crushed it. Your home had only one room, no bedroom, no separate kitchen, no toilet. That we'll cover in the next section. No fire alarm, no rescue horn. But if the smoke got too thick, your grandmother would shout, "Is it on fire again, Ivar?" and slap you awake. Very humane, very effective. Everything, from sleeping, eating, breathing to giving birth, happened on one smoke-darkened floor, under flickering firelight and the smell of protective fat. From the ceiling dangled iron hooks for drying fish, hanging meat, even goat hay, like a floating general store. Everyone had their own space, not separated by walls, but by silent glances and shared breath. You had no privacy, but you were never truly alone. You lay next to your mother, your grandmother, and 3 goats. One liked licking your hair while you dreamed. One liked sticking its head under grandma's armpit. The third was hanging upside down above the hearth, slowly turning into winter bacon. No glass windows, just a tiny light hole, sealed with dried fish bladder. From outside, the house looked like a soul cave, where sunlight only knocked once a day before leaving again. Grandma often whispered before bed, "Shut the door so the cold souls won't hear our breath." No one laughed, because here the cold has ears. You think light would comfort you. No, it only comes to remind you, today is colder than yesterday. This little house, to you, is the world. It's where you grow up. It's where you sleep, hear stories, eat, and hope the roof doesn't collapse in the night. It isn't pretty. It isn't sturdy. It doesn't smell good. But it has your mother, your grandmother. A fire, if you can light one. The smell of goat, ash, fat, and torn memories patched together by survival. So, call it home, okay? Because if you don't, then what you're living in is just a frozen tomb with grass on top. A temporary shelter that lasts forever. No one built it to live there for life, but they still died old inside it. Because survival, sometimes, is just stretching out the temporary until it becomes inheritance. You wake up with a lingering smell of ash in your nose. No alarm clock, just your grandmother's sigh. A long, organized sigh, as if she dreamed of next year's weather last night. And it was just as bad. Breakfast. Oh, don't dream of pancakes, bacon, or coffee. What you have is runny barley porridge, cooked from whatever water was left over from yesterday, if there was any. You scoop it with a wooden spoon, which used to be the best spoon in the house. Now, the handle's cracked, the tip's chipped, and the wood's turned a suspect brown. On top of the porridge, sometimes, there's a layer of congealed fat. That's the oil from yesterday's lamp, dripping into the pot. Nobody bothers to scoop it out, because that's the flavor. What about cheese? Yes, the dark brown cheese, Gammelost, that smells like a soldier's feet after 3 weeks of marching. It's been aged on the loft for months, sometimes growing moss. But moss is natural, your mother says. You eat it with a knife, not because it's cool, but because it's as hard as frozen arsenic, and because dividing it is a sacred ritual. The chunk of cheese is cut with the knife your father left behind, placed on an old wooden board, like a curse from your ancestors. The biggest piece goes to Grandpa, because he has a beard and the right to silence. The smallest goes to the children, because they don't yet know the value of hardship. Each person takes their piece with both hands, as if receiving the soul of a winter spent enduring. You bite into it, tears in your eyes, not because it's spicy, but because your teeth are loose. Still, that's the premium part. On special days, if you're really lucky, there'll be a piece of flat rye bread baked on the stone. They call it flatbread, as thin as snakeskin, crisp as honor, and as fragile as trust in spring. You eat it carefully, like reading a will, because one wrong breath, and he'll fly away, and that's a luxury. On bad days, you eat thin porridge, old cheese, or nothing at all. Instead, you drink bad yogurt, fermented milk, tasting like something that once lived, now lazily dying off. It's called surmilk, fermented yogurt, but you call it the reason I don't eat breakfast. What about meat? It only appears when there's a funeral. A sheep that broke its leg last season gets dried. Children are only allowed to smell it unless they're about to die. Then they get rewarded with a piece. It's ironic. To eat meat, you have to be sick. To eat your fill, someone has to die. The living eat half a stomach's worth. The sick eat for two. After eating, you don't wash your hands with soap. You just rub them in the stove ash, warm and antibacterial. The smell left on your hands is a blend of smoke, fat and burnt wood, like you just hugged a wolf that was on fire. And if it's below minus 20 degrees Celsius that day, the porridge hasn't even finished before it freezes like liquid cement. You have to cut it into chunks with a knife, and then gnaw. Each bite sounds like an axe hitting your self-respect. Many children who haven't learned to speak have already learned to close their eyes when they eat, because the pain in their teeth makes their eyes water. But strangely, everyone thanks God for that meal. Not because it's tasty, but because it's still food, because it's a sign you've survived another day in the long winter. And before eating, your grandmother always taps 3 times on the side of the bowl, as if calling the soul of someone long gone. Chase the hunger ghosts away so the living can eat first, she whispers, eyes not looking at anyone. That tradition no one dares to skip, because the one time it was skipped that year, the dog at home starved to death. Since then, everyone remembers, tap the bowl before eating, not because of superstition, but because you don't want to repeat history. And so, you get up, half full, half discouraged. Outside, it's still as cold as death, but you've eaten, and that is enough to start a new day, another day, a repeat, with porridge, cheese, and the art of endurance. You think medieval fashion is all about iron helmets and cool cloaks. Not quite. What you're wearing right now is 3 layers of wool, 2 layers of leather, 1 layer of faith, and the smell of long-standing dampness. Welcome to survival fashion, where beauty has to kneel before the cold. First, the coarse woolen undergarment, woven from uncombed sheep's wool, or from anything that could be braided together. Dog hair? Sure. Goat hair collected after the shearing season? Yes. Some even use their own fallen hair as a way to embrace themselves. Putting it on feels like hugging an angry hedgehog, but at least it's warm. Then there's the goat leather jacket, still smelling of the old goat, the kind of scent that says, not quite ready for reincarnation. But that's for those lucky enough to have a coat. For the rest, A coat is a patchwork of patches. You wear a jacket where each piece is a memory. The brown patch, from the winter when Grandpa froze to death. The green patch, from your father's old trousers. And the white patch, once your mother's mourning veil. You look like a walking family quilt, warm yet haunting. If you're lucky, you might have a vadmel jacket, the thick wool fabric famous in medieval northern Europe. It's heavy, thick, and stiff like a sacred doormat, but it's enough to block the wind, keep you warm, and break your back if worn incorrectly. They used to say, if you have vadmel, you can survive or fight a bear. Below, there's thick woolen pants, the kind that, if wet, will leave you cold to the bone. The thickness depends on social status. Children wear less to get used to life's hardships. The elderly get wrapped in many layers because we need them to tell stories. You, an adult stuck in the middle, must choose between a cold upper body or losing feeling in your legs. Cold that cuts through fabric, straight to the bone, as if someone's whispering into your knee joints with the breath of a blizzard. Cold that cuts through fabric, straight to the bone, as if someone's whispering into your knee joints with the breath of a blizzard. You wrap fabric strips around your legs, called vin, not for style, but to keep warm and ensure your socks don't fall off. Woolen socks with holes in the heels. Shoes, that's a luxury. Most of your friends wear patched up leather shoes, soles so worn down you can feel every pebble under the snow. Sometimes you wonder, is this a shoe or my new layer of skin? Hats, yes, made from rabbit fur or thick wool, covering your ears, but they don't cover the sound of the cold biting into your chest. Some even cover their heads with old blanket covers, looking like a walking fungus, but at least warmer than the villagers' hearts. On windy days, you'll see people walking like reeds cursed by the wind god. Everyone's hunched over, hands tucked under their armpits, murmuring prayers or curses. And then there are days when you have to go outside in -30, not because you want to, but because you need water to light a fire or to bury the stiff chicken from last night. At that point, your clothes are a feeble shield between you and the god of death, who's standing behind the pine bushes, wearing a fur scarf and laughing softly. Once, you saw someone wearing 3 layers of coats, then falling over because they couldn't bend. Nobody helped immediately. They were busy, laughing. Then they remembered, laughing too much lets heat escape through your teeth, and fell silent. Fashion? No. This is biological camouflage for survival. It's the daily bargaining. Add another layer, or sell firewood. Wrap the fabric around your legs, or keep it as a mourning cloth. Because in 13th century Norway, you don't dress to look good. You dress to not die while gathering salted eggs. And so, you pull your hat down, tuck your hands into your sleeves, take a deep breath. For what? Who knows? Because it feels like ice water flowing backwards. Then you step outside, cold, but alive. You think stepping out of the house to breathe the winter air is romantic. In 13th century Norway, it's a one-way trip. The sun hasn't risen. Your face, it's not awake either. You open the door and see the entire world whitewashed, cold enough that the pine tree in your yard seems to be questioning its reason for existence. The wind hits your face like a slap from Odin, with some gravel thrown in. You pull your coat tighter. Your back aches, your hands tremble. But you still have to head to the forest's edge, because firewood is the only thing keeping the living from the dead, separated by nothing but a flame. No firewood, no hot food, no water melted from snow, no crackling fire to distract you from your hunger. In the 13th century, firewood wasn't just fuel, it was the only thing between you and the Ice Age. The old ones calculated that, to survive one winter, every house needed at least 4 to 6 cubic meters of firewood, the equivalent of chopping an entire small forest by hand. And of course, you start chopping in the fall, drying it from September, covering it from October. If you're a week late, you're heating with the funeral clothes of loved ones. Each household sends someone to chop wood every day, but not everyone is strong enough to go. If your father is sick, you go. If your brother died last year, you go. If your mother's been widowed since last winter, you go. If you're the eldest, congratulations, you're chosen. If you're the youngest, sorry, you're still chosen, because you're young. If you're nobody, you're still chosen, because you're free. Nobody volunteers, only the one who protests the least. Steps out the door first. You carry an axe. Not a new axe, but the one that's been sharpened and resharpened since your great-grandfather's time. The wooden handle has been replaced with an old ash branch, the blades chipped at the edge, just like your faith after the third winter. If you lose it, your family loses a member, because without the axe, there's no firewood. No firewood, no you. The weight? Just enough to make your shoulder lean to one side. You walk 3 kilometers in snow up to your knees, like swimming through frozen detergent. You reach the forest. The Norwegian forest isn't a place you want to wander in without a survival reason. And the trees, they're not something you want to chop. You have to choose wisely. Birch for quick burning, pine for long-lasting heat, but willows, leave them. They burn badly and wet. Children are tasked with gathering dry twigs, safer and saves energy. Adults must pick trees that are dead but not rotten, so you can chop once and burn for a week. You look for a tree that's halfway dead, dry enough to burn, but not battered by the wind. Dry enough to burn, but not battered by the wind. You swing the axe. Crack. A piece of wood falls. A piece of your back falls with it. Sometimes you forget gloves. Sometimes you forget yourself. You stand in the middle of the forest, look up at the sky, and think of your father. He too went chopping wood that year. It was a heavy snowstorm. The people in the village said he'd come back when the fire in the hearth died down. But the fire still burns, and he never came back. No funeral, just a pair of old gloves left on the doorstep, soaked and stiff as an unspoken farewell. You don't ask anymore. No one asks anymore. Here, the cold kills, as silently as sipping lukewarm tea. You chop enough for a bundle, tie it with twine, and carry it on your shoulder. Your shoulder hurts. Your fingers have no feeling. You walk back, each step like dragging a living mummy. Each breath is a negotiation with death. Just get back to the house. Just one more time. And then, you see the light from the hearth in the distance. Smoke rises, laughter or wind, it's unclear. You set the bundle of wood down. Your knees buckle. Your spine screams, like it's being sawed the wrong way. No one pats your back. No one praises you. But they open the door. They take the wood. And the fire burns. And so, the dead continue to rest peacefully in the forest. The living continue to shiver around the hearth, and you, still here, with hands that no longer know warmth, but still holding the axe, still coming back. You think fire is something that sparkles, warms you, and looks like a winter postcard scene. No. In 13th century Norway, fire isn't for looking at. It's the only thing that keeps your heart beating for another night. The house is pitch black. There's only the hearth, a bright black heart in the middle of the house, crackling like someone breathing heavily in the middle of a snowstorm. People don't sit by the fire for fun. They sit close to the fire so they don't die from the cold. You sleep half an arm's length away from the hearth. Any further, you'll freeze to the bone. Too close, you'll wake up to the smell of burning hair and feel like you're the roast that hasn't been turned. Every night, firewood is burned from the middle of the house, beneath the low ceiling and walls made of dirt, straw, or dry stone. There's no chimney. The smoke rises, swirling around the ceiling, making your eyes sting, as if life itself had given you a lesson. Children grow up used to the fog. Adults cough continuously, a wheezy chorus that lasts until March. The old lady has been coughing from Christmas to Easter, and then suddenly she stops. No one knows whether to rejoice because she's better, or worry because she's gone. The fire warms, but the smoke eats at your lungs day by day. Ash, thought to be waste, is actually treasure. Ash keeps heat. Ash prevents slipping. Ash protects. People spread ash on the floor to keep it dry. They spread it around the animal pens to prevent freezing. They spread it on bloodstains, if someone's hurt, to stop the bleeding temporarily. You even wipe your hands with ash, because soap. Luxury. Ash mixed with water was used by the old ones to wash pots, eliminate odors, and sometimes mixed with dry leaves to make a scrubbing mixture. Many grandmothers mixed ash with water and herbal wine to wash animal wounds and, sometimes, wash their own cracked hands. Ash is the only thing that both cleans and reminds you the fire once burned. Charcoal is carefully kept in clay jars. The elder in the house, usually your grandmother or mother, takes the responsibility of watching the fire, as if holding on to the last soul of the family. At night, she usually wakes up twice, just to turn the coals, push the logs, and make sure that there's still a glow in the ashes. Because if the fire goes out, it's not just cold. It's the last breath that has gone out. In the morning, you pour the charcoal onto a pile of dry straw, blowing on it as if you're trying to hold on to a warm dream. If the fire doesn't catch, you curl up and wonder if there's any firewood left. If the fire burns, you smile, even though your lips are cracked like dry earth. Some people burn dry manure, especially horse manure. The smell, not pleasant, but warm. The poor burn manure. The poorer burn. Hope they had manure to burn. Fire is also the center of society. Every story revolves around the hearth. You hear about the soul of the dead lost in the snow, about the fox that speaks human language, and about the old woman who was accidentally burned because she coughed too much. An elder once said, "The fire is where memories are told and kept alive." Telling stories by the fire isn't just to kill time. It's how people pass down the reasons to keep existing. The last of the ash, in March, is mixed with manure spread over the fields, not just because the soil needs potassium, but because everything that has burned to ash deserves a chance to be reborn. Some places even use the ash mixed with porridge for the animals to eat, like a folk remedy to deworm them. The old ones said, the more bitter the ash, the cleaner the stomach. Not sure if it's true. Just know the pig survived, and that's enough for the winter. You look at the grey ash pile and see the nights that have passed, the people who are gone, the words left unsaid, and the days you didn't think you'd survive, but you did, because in that ash there's still fire, and in you there's still the thought, I survived once more. You think winter is all about white snow, pine trees, and flickering candlelight. Here, the snow is a trap, the candlelight is bait, and the darkness has a name. In 13th century Norway, winter wasn't just cold, it was long, thick, and silent enough to hear your own heart miss a beat. And in that darkness, people didn't dare believe they were alone. You weren't allowed to leave the house after sunset. No whistling at night. No speaking the names of the dead. No mentioning the creatures you hear on the roof. Because if they hear their name, they'll know you're awake. They called them trolls, but don't picture the cute drawings in children's books. In the 13th century, trolls weren't cute. Trolls were meat eaters, stinky, and smarter than you'd think. They lived at the edge of the forest, on mountain slopes, and in places where light couldn't reach. It was believed that if you lit a candle at the wrong time, you were inviting them into your house. And not just trolls, but also Nisa, little gnome-like creatures with tangled hair, wearing red hats, living in the grain storage or the sheep pen. If you forgot to leave a bowl of oatmeal for them on a winter night, Nisa would get angry. They could sour the milk, make the horse restless, or make children cry all night. But if you remembered their oatmeal, you might get a peaceful night's sleep. If you drop salt, you have to throw a handful out the door to redirect them. Some houses buried dull knives under the door threshold as an unspoken threat to the world beyond. Others carved images of the sun into the barn doors to protect the livestock from being drained of their strength. Children were given small pieces of wood with runes carved on them, ancient symbols their fathers touched during Christmas night. They believed that if the child's small hand started to freeze too early, the runes would warm up as a warning that something wasn't right and was coming closer. Children were warned not to look out the window after dinner. If you saw a figure standing there, look down, pray. Don't answer the third knock. In the heart of winter, light is both a signal and a trap, because fish oil isn't cheap, and it's not easy to come by in the freezing cold. Oil lamps, usually made from codfish oil, were only lit during special rituals, or when there was suspicion of a cold wind that doesn't belong to nature. You didn't light the fire too brightly. You didn't hang a lamp by the door. Because people believed anything that knows what light is also knows how to find you. When the snow piles up to your eye level and the wind howls like the breath of someone long gone, every belief becomes a weapon. Every year during Yule, in the middle of the longest night, a large log would be burned non-stop for 3 nights straight. That fire wasn't just for warmth. It was to distract the lost souls, those who waited for the fire to die before they could find their way into the house. The elderly would warn each other, if the log dies before the 3rd night, spring won't come. You believe in trolls, mountain spirits, and the silent figures wearing fur hats. Not because you're superstitious, but because fear needs a name to keep you from dying from the inside. And there are nights, even with the doors locked, the lights off, and everything made of iron hidden, you still hear something walking in the snow, slowly, realistically. Then stop, right outside your door. Section 8. Sleeping with goats and primitive strategies for staying warm. You're lying in a 13th century Norwegian house. The wind howls outside, as if it's trying to rip the roof off. The floor is packed dirt. The wooden walls are as thin as truss during tax season. Warm blankets? None. A fireplace? Also none. Instead, you have a goat named Bjarne sleeping right next to your face. Yes, you're not seeing things. Sleeping with a goat is the most sensible way to stay warm in a world without electric heaters or down comforters. The body heat of an animal, especially a goat, a sheep, or even a calf, can keep a person warm through an entire winter night. The average house has just one room. The Norwegians call it langhus, a long house, half for living, half for housing animals. No divisions, just straw and smells. The smell of dry grass, ash, goat, and sometimes the fearful scent of winter creeping through the drafty door. People and animals live together. No separation, no boundaries. Chickens roost above the beams. Pigs scratch the floor below. And the goats? Goats prefer to sleep close to people, just warm enough, just smelly enough. And they're also an early warning system when strange winds or misplaced snowflakes fall. Another common strategy. Wear everything you can find. Some regions even had the custom of placing hot potatoes near children's feet, both for warmth and as an alarm system if the child gets too cold. Adults hug warm bags of ash from the Yule fire, like holding onto the last remnants of a warmer world. Woolen shirts, sheepskin coats, flax skirts, hemp fabrics, old rice bags, hand-sewn fox fur, and old rope wrapped around legs. And if you ask about sleepwear, well, no one took their clothes off to sleep in the 13th century. They just lay down, still in their ash-dusted, goat-smelling clothes, with a little dirt from the potatoes. You look like a breathing pile of straw, but at least you're not freezing to death while dreaming of bread. What about beds? There are none. Just a pile of straw, sometimes mixed with a few rotting beans or a mouse's tail, spread out on the dirt floor. People lie close together, facing inward, so the wind doesn't crawl into their noses. Children are taught from a young age. Always face toward your mother or the wall, never face outward. Adults believe that the winter wind doesn't just freeze, it eats your breath if you face the wrong direction while dreaming. There's an unspoken rule. The sick lie in the middle, pressed for warmth between two others, like a life or death sandwich. If you're lucky, you might borrow a warm stone, heated in the Yule fire's ashes, wrapped in cloth, and placed at the foot of your bed. It keeps warmth for about 2 hours, and then it turns into a cold stone. Just like the feeling you get when you wake up at 3:17 in the morning, hearing the even rhythm of snow falling, and remembering that you forgot to close the chicken coop door. Any other tricks to stay warm? Some people hang dry leather bags filled with glowing charcoal behind their backs. Some hold warm stones in their mouths, dangerous, but less painful than a toothache. Some children even get their calves rubbed with pitch oil by their parents, not for its effectiveness, but because the smell is strong enough to scare off a cold. Whatever the strategy is, you know one thing: if you survive through tonight, it's because that goat didn't leave your side, and because you can still smell the ash smoke in your nose. And if you're wondering, how did people survive back then? Well, they didn't survive. A lot of people didn't make it through their first winter, but the ones who did, they lived as if each breath was a victory. If you were a child living in 13th century Norway, congratulations. You've been an adult since you were 7. No teddy bears, no school, no magical winter full of presents, just firewood, frozen water, and responsibilities no one waits for you to grow into before giving them. You wake up before the sun and follow the goats. You carry water in a bucket bigger than half your body. You blow the fire with a hollow pipe made from bird bones. In some places, your mother will give you a hot bag of ash to hold to your stomach to keep warm while you stoke the morning fire. If the ash cools before the fire catches, you're scolded. If the fire catches too quickly, you're scolded. The line between good and burning your hands is as thin as the ice in early January. You stoke the ash with purple hands, shaking not because of the cold, but because you're not fast enough to avoid your mother's scolding. Since you were too young to lose your baby teeth, you knew you had to be useful. In some areas, girls as young as 6 learned how to milk goats or sew up their father's torn woolen clothes. Boys were given the job of being the snow gatekeeper, taking a long stick to tap the roof to see if the snow had piled up enough to shovel it off in time. No hands were allowed to be idle during the winter, because idle hands mean hunger. You knit wool, pick thistles, sift ash, shear sheep wool, clean the goat pen, make foot rags, gather dry onion skins for burning. Each child was a gear in the survival machine, and if you broke a gear, the machine would jam, the family would freeze. Someone would cry, and no one would have the time to comfort them. You didn't ask why it's cold. You just learned how to add more straw to the bed. You didn't ask why your father wasn't home. You just learned how to break wood with your knees and not break the other knee. You might have toys if they're sheep bones carved into a troll face. In some areas, people use dry cabbage to make a ball to toss back and forth until it split in half and was cooked into the evening soup. Fun and frugality in the same throw. You might have songs if you remember the tune your grandmother used to hum while drying her hands by the fire. You're not a child. You're a small adult. You don't live childhood. You live the winter. And if there's anything left after March, it's the memory that you once knew love with 2 dirty hands and a nose dripping with mucus. When the sun finally surrenders and dips behind the mountain ridge, the only thing left in the house is the sound of voices and the remaining warmth. No electricity, no candles for each person, no distractions, except sitting close together, not out of love, but because if you sit too far apart, it'll be cold. The fire dims. The light shrinks to a pale yellow glow, just enough to see your mother's hands weaving and your father's boot resting on a log. You pull your feet into the blanket. The smell of old chimney smoke curls around your hair. Now is the time when stories begin. Not from books, because no one has books, but from the elderly, the living libraries, who know how to tell tales with their eyes, their breath, and their trembling hands when talking about winters long ago. But not fairy tales, real stories from winters before, about the grandfather who fell asleep by the fish drying rack and never woke up, about the cousin who slipped into a snow hole while going to dump manure, about the old goat who saved the family by being slaughtered just in time. You listen, but you don't speak. In some homes, children are made to hold a mouthful of dry moss while sitting beside the elderly, so they don't ask questions that would make the old ones cry. You breathe softly, so as not to stir the wind. You learn that night is when silence can save your life, while noise calls death to knock at the door. Some children sneeze too loudly, and the next morning, the whole family had to dig through the snow to find the missing chimney pipe. And then, in some moment, you find your hand in your mother's. Some families even place a warm stone in between, called the false heart, so your hands don't get cold when no one dares to speak a kind word. No one remembers who held whose hand first, but your mother's hand is warm. And for the first time that whole day, you let yourself sigh. Just one little sigh, enough to live until the morning. Because sometimes, in the absolute cold, people survive not on food, but on a hoarse voice by the fire, and the breath still lingering on someone's lips. Have you ever smelled grass? The real kind, not mossy, damp, or mouse nest smelling, but real grass, the kind that's dried in the sun, making your feet itch and your neck warm after just a few steps. Maybe you don't remember anymore, but your brain remembers, your body remembers, and night is when that memory stabs you with dreams. You see yourself walking on dry gravel, holding the back of a lazy cow, watching your mother hang clothes by the creek. The smell of dried grass floats from the hesje, the drying racks on the hills, so sweet that you believe summer can be wrapped up by hand and carried through winter. You hear the hen calling its chicks, a sound that can only be heard in June. The old ones say, when you hear that sound in your dreams, it means the fields still remember you. You feel like your cold, stiff arm just touched a ray of sunlight, but you open your eyes and you're still here. No chickens, no sunlight, just the breath of the person beside you and a piece of wood that's barely burning from 3 nights ago. In the darkness, in the smell of lingering smoke, old wool, and people sleeping too close. Is that a memory or a promise that if you endure a few more weeks, the winds will change, that the snow will melt, that the seeds buried in October won't die? Children in 13th century Norway had no concept of summer vacation. Some asked, will there still be summer next year? And the adults avoided answering because truthfully, no one was sure. Summer is when you cut grass, dry fish, patch the tent, and have babies. Summer is when you work the hardest, because winter is always lurking behind you. But in the winter nights, amidst the snoring of the grandfather and the soft moans of the grandmother's aching joints, summer becomes a beautiful illusion, a naive belief that the whole family holds on to, like holding a small spark in the cold ashes. Some families even keep a piece of wood from June, called the sommerkjerne, only burned on the coldest nights, as an invitation for the sun to return. You don't need to believe fully, just dream, enough to wake up tomorrow and keep boiling snow for water. because sometimes the survivors aren't the strongest. They're the ones who still dream while their hands are still holding the shovel. No one teaches you how to survive. There are no guides, no TED Talks in the frozen Norwegian woods, just those before you and the tracks they leave behind. You learn by repeating small actions, so instinctively it becomes second nature, like blowing smoke through a piece of cloth to avoid coughing and waking your grandmother, like knowing how to dry your gloves with your breath, not with fire, like never leaning against the northern wall where the cold creeps in from the stone. There's no technique that guarantees living well, only techniques for not disappearing. You step into a long winter, like an endless file upload in the forest. No sound, no light, nothing strange happening. And to combat disappearance, you create habits. A warm stone placed at the foot of your bed before sleep. A muttered prayer before drinking snow water. Please don't freeze in my lungs. A carved stick of wood with runes only you understand. A line drawn on the beam every time there's a full moon, so you don't forget to count the months. The world outside may be white and silent, but inside you is a list of small techniques like subtractions, less cold, less hunger, less shivering, less fear. No one knows how effective they are, but if you're reading this, at least they've been enough. The survivors aren't the ones with the most. They're the ones who remember the smallest things and make them a ritual every day. Amasesis Faidin. Zhang, Han, Dynasty Salt Transporter. The Han Dynasty was in its golden age. The empire stretched from the East China Sea to the Central Asian steppes. They built walls, minted money, developed the royal library, and controlled salt as if it were the lifeblood of the economy. Salt was taxed, distributed, sealed, and carried. It was shoulders like Zhang's, not generals, that kept the empire from rotting from within. Salt wasn't just for eating. It was used for medicine, embalming, paying soldiers, and preserving food through the winter. In ancient China, salt was as important as the internet is to you now. Without it, society would unravel. The Han Dynasty even established the Imperial Salt Bureau, an agency dedicated to overseeing the consumption of salt. Zhang, though without a doctorate, was a living link in this complex management system. Zhang didn't have monuments, grand tombstones, or even a shadow in the annals of history, but he once existed, on his bent shoulders and 2 salt barrels as heavy as the unspoken memories. Zhang could have been your neighbor if you lived 80 years before the Common Era, except he didn't use the internet, didn't drink coffee, and carried 80 kilos of salt every day without anyone sending a like. He didn't have a podcast, but if he did, the title would probably be What My Shoulders Say When I'm Silent. If you've ever felt like you're carrying something no one else can see, then you and Zhang might not be so far apart after all. You're not nobility, you're not a scholar, you're not a heroic adventurer riding across the steppes. In the Han Dynasty, society was divided into 4 layers: scholars, farmers, artisans, and merchants. You don't even fit into one of those categories. You're a laborer. A bare-handed person in the eyes of the elite. Even though you carry salt for the entire empire, you're not called a noble profession. Just a little mud on your clothes, and you're seen as having a tainted character. You are Zhang, a man with no surname in the history books. A man who rises before the sun and sleeps before the moon rises. Not out of love for poetry, but because he's tired. You live around 80 years before the Common Era, during the Han Dynasty. More specifically, in a small village south of Chang'an, far enough from the capital to not smell the power, but close enough to still be taxed. You can't read, but you know how to tie a rope to a yoke so it doesn't slip. You don't read the book of songs, but you know every slippery path when it rains, and every pothole that makes your spine twist. Your house has a thatched roof and earthen walls. Every winter, your hands crack like a war map. You sleep next to a stove that's not hot enough to cook anything but charcoal. You rest your head on straw. You're covered with a thin blanket that used to be someone's grandmother's wedding dress. Occasionally, a mouse chews at your feet during the night. But that's a good thing, because that means you still have feeling in your body. You have an elderly mother, a cracked porcelain bowl, and a coat with 10 patches. And you have a profession called legal salt carrier. After Emperor Wu of Han's reforms, salt became one of the 3 most important state-controlled industries, alongside iron and wine. No one was allowed to sell salt or make it without a permit. If you were a commoner, you couldn't scrape salt from the beach. You couldn't even accidentally buy illegal salt. And you, Jiang, were the one carrying the salt that had been officially sealed by the court. Sounds fancy. But you know, you're just the legs of a large system so big that no one knows who's carrying who. Sounds important, but in reality, you're just the shadow of someone carrying 2 barrels of salt across the plains. You don't make salt, you don't sell salt, you just carry it. But carrying salt in the Han Dynasty isn't like being a modern-day delivery person. No one tips you. No one asks if you've eaten yet. No one remembers your face, except for a low-ranking official who always suspects you're a smuggler. You wake up before the rooster crows, not because you're diligent, but because you hear something fall on the roof. Maybe dry leaves, maybe a rat, maybe part of you has just fallen off life. The blanket is thin, the bed doesn't exist. You lie on a dirt floor covered with straw, the same straw you replace once a month, or whenever you notice a worm poking out of its ear. You roll over, and every joint cracks like the sound of burning coal. Tonight is colder than yesterday, and today will be longer than yesterday. There's no clock, no alarm. You measure time by smoke. When the first wisp of smoke rises from the house next door, it means they've started boiling water. If you don't see smoke, it means they're hungrier than yesterday. You get up, a little dizzy. Your stomach isn't hungry, because it's used to not being asked. You grab your coat, exactly a cotton coat patched with someone else's sleeves, and carefully step over your mother, still asleep. That coat used to be white. Now it's ash-colored, smells like dried fish, and carries the memory of 3 generations. The fabric is worn thin. It only retains a little dignity, not to keep you warm, but to preserve the self-respect of the poor against the wind. Your mother is groaning softly. Her back hurts, maybe since the reign of the first Han Emperor. You start carrying before the sun even appears, not to arrive early, but to avoid the sunlight that's hot enough to burn even the half-fallen nail from last year. The salt barrels on your shoulders, each about 40 kilograms. If the weather is dry today, the salt is lighter. But if it rained last night, then you're carrying a small sea. Not the romantic blue sea with crashing waves, but the damp, salty sea, settled in your spine. The road is a nameless path. The villagers call it the Salt Road. The tax soldiers call it the supply route. Since the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, salt became one of the most tightly controlled state commodities. Transport routes are marked, inspected, and taxed at the salt checkpoints. You have to stop, show your route permit, submit a quantity list, even if your back is drenched in sweat. One wrong mark could cost you a month's wages, or 2 days in prison for violating imperial protocol. You call it the excuse for your aching back every day. You walk through fields. The fields aren't yours. You walk through hills. The hills don't remember how many times you've fallen. You walk through bamboo forests. That road, when it rains, it's as slippery as snakeskin. On sunny days, it's so dusty you can't see. At one point, you have to cross a stream, stepping on stones one by one. If you stray even a little, the whole salt barrel will fall. And if it falls, you still have to pay for it, whether it's the stone's fault or the sky's fault. And the old monkey in the tree seems to be the only creature who remembers your name, because every morning it throws something at your head, like nature's salty greeting. Occasionally, someone walks with you, an old man, a child. Some carry salt to feed their grandchildren. Some carry it because they lost their fields to floods, and because those fields were rented with high-interest rice from the imperial court. No one is born to carry salt. They just slip into it, like water sliding down a crevice in the rock. And there, no one climbs back up. No one speaks, because if they speak, they'll start gasping for breath. And if you gasp for breath, you can't breathe. And if you can't breathe, you'll fall. There's an unspoken rule among those who carry salt. No one passes anyone, because everyone is carrying the same load. No one looks down on anyone, because everyone is bowing under the sun, a kind of power that can never be dethroned. You rest on the road, wipe the sweat from your brow with your sleeve. The shirt is wet, the salt is salty, your eyes sting. You chew on a piece of dried radish to hold off hunger. It's tough, bitter and cool, like a reminder from a past life that life has never been gentle. For those who only know how to keep walking. You keep walking. On your shoulders, the two salt barrels still sway like two friends who don't want to leave each other, but don't speak. They creak every time you climb a hill, like the silent complaints of wood, rope, and the compressed youth. Up ahead, you see the familiar marker, a smooth rock, a stunted wild shrub. You don't look at it. You just glance at it, because you've passed it 400 times. And every time, it feels like the first time, when you broke your neck. And the scariest thing is, no one is forcing you to do this job. No one ties you down. No one threatens you. There's just one thing that keeps you from turning back. Your mother is waiting. The rice is running out, and people can't eat their pride. Did you ever work through the heat of noon just to avoid losing your morning wages? Zhang did too. Did you ever tear up because there was just enough money to buy your mother medicine, but not enough to eat dinner? Zhang did too. Times may change, but the burden still stays in the same place, on your shoulders and in your heart. You arrive at the checkpoint just when the sun is high enough to make sweat trickle down places you didn't know had sweat glands. The gate is small, but the attitude of the guards is always bigger than their shadows. They don't look at you. They look at the salt barrels, as if you're just the rack holding the heartbeat. The official is seated inside. He was once a failed student, then promoted to salt manager because he knew someone in the court. No need to know literature, just know how to collect, submit, and survive each inspection from the superiors. A small official, but one who holds the survival of hundreds of salt carriers. A fat belly, holding a calligraphy brush, a brush that someone like you, a salt carrier, would only touch if forced to testify. He doesn't need to raise his head. Just the sound of footsteps and the creaking wood lets him know who you are, where you're from, and how much you owe. Write the name, measure the load, pay the inspection fee. His voice doesn't come from his throat, but from a habit of power, honed every day over a costly stewed chicken. You open the route permit. The permit lists the number of barrels, the mining region, and the red stamp confirming each checkpoint. You have to keep the paper clean, but how can it stay clean when your hands have never been clean since the first trip? The paper is wet, sweaty, and a stain that you suspect is salt water, or the tears from the last trip. The official looks at the paper. His eyes narrow as if he's just discovered that you're a threat to national order. A smeared ink mark, a missing stroke. That's enough to make you wait for 2 hours under the sun for verification. Verification of what? No one says. Perhaps it's verifying whether you're even human, because in their eyes, you seem more like a moving cart, quietly carrying a scent. Another young salt carrier, younger than you, nervously hands over his paper. The official says nothing, just taps the brush lightly on the table, then turns to the guard. This paper is fake. Fine. 2 days in prison, or double the inspection fee. The boy cries. You don't look. Because looking would infect you with the feeling of no longer being human. You place the 2 salt barrels on the scale. The official marks it with red ink. Since the reign of Emperor Wu of Han, salt is no longer something you can dig up. It's something you must buy the right to transport. The state established the Salt Bureau, a system of officials who specialize in monitoring salt, checking every load. If you don't present the required 3 documents, 2 receipts, 3 permits, 2 weighing slips, you're considered a minor criminal. The salt may be light, but the paperwork is as heavy as a stone on your livelihood. The red ink mark is as big as a bloodstain on white paper, a form of authentication that doesn't even care what you think. You pay the fee, something you know won't be used to fix the roads or buy shoes for the soldiers, but will be used to buy wine for meetings. Before you leave the checkpoint, the official looks at you for a long time. Then he says something that makes you want to laugh and sit down and disappear. Whatever job you do, you should be proud of it. Don't bring shame to the transport class. You bow your head, not to obey, but to hide the smile that died in your throat long ago. You walk away. On your shoulders is not just salt, but the gaze of suspicion from a system designed to never trust you. Have you ever been scrutinized by a supermarket guard just because you wore an old jacket? Zhang was also scrutinized just because his load was uneven. Have you ever waited in line for 3 hours just because your signature wasn't fully legible? Zhang was also detained just because the paper was wet, from sweat, not dishonesty. Times change, but the system of suspicion towards the poor remains unchanged. You eat not because you're hungry, but because if you faint, the salt will spill. And spilling the salt means losing another life. The sun is at its peak. Your shadow is gone. Only the shadow of the salt barrels remains. The things you carry through rain, under the sun, through inspections, and now, the things you have to hide under to eat. You sit by the roadside. You don't sit all the way down because your shirt is still wet, and you don't want the fabric to collect more sand. You don't have enough money to buy a replacement shirt, so every stain must follow you home. What's for lunch? For a salt carrier during the Han Dynasty, it's usually dry brown rice mixed with a little millet or boiled beans, leftovers from the night before. No meat, no soup, no sauce. Even though you're carrying salt, you're the rare person who never gets to season your own meal. Salt is for payment, not for eating. A paradox that makes your stomach both laugh awkwardly and growl loudly. It's a handful of old rice, wrapped from the night before, placed in a banana leaf, or old newspaper, if you're lucky enough to have someone in the house who went to the market. The rice is hard. Sometimes there's a sprig of sour pickled vegetables. Sometimes there's nothing. Sometimes, if the official laughs that day, you get to eat without having to pay extra for carrying food. You chew slowly. Meanwhile, a mile away at the checkpoint, someone is sitting down eating sour fish soup, steamed buns with meat filling, and millet wine. There's wind. There's shade. There's even the sound of a flute played by some wealthy scholar practicing for his exams. The people above eat to fill their stomachs. The people below eat to not die. The stomach also shares the same class as the official's rank. It's not for enjoyment, but to delay the moment of swallowing. Because after you swallow, you know you're still hungry. Someone walks by, a paper fan vendor, a donkey pulling a straw cart, an old woman looking for a lost chicken. No one stops, because they all know the person sitting there carrying salt doesn't want to be seen eating. You drink a sip of water. It's neither cold, nor clean, nor enough, but enough to wash down the piece of grass that's been stuck in your throat since morning. You don't say anything. No one says anything, because at noon, everyone uses silence like salt sprinkled on a wound. It stings. It's needed. You look ahead, where there's still 3 miles of dirt road and 3 more checkpoints. You don't look forward to the evening meal, because if you make it home, it means you're still alive. Suddenly, you remember the hot soup your mother made when you were 7. It had dried fish. It had laughter. It had a Jang who didn't carry anything. But that was before your father died, before the land was taken over by the imperial court, before you had to live by your shoulders instead of your hands. You once complained about the lack of sauce in office meals. Jang once had to lick his fingertips for the salty taste when the rice was too bland. You once got upset when the cafeteria ran out of your favorite dish. Jang didn't dare choose, because back then, being able to eat was the choice of luck. You stand up. Your stomach is still empty, but you still walk, because the salt barrels don't carry themselves, and because your mother is still waiting at home with an empty pot. Your shoulders are empty, but your knees are shaking, and inside your chest, there's something heavier than salt. The sun hasn't set. It just hides behind the smoke from the last haystack at the edge of the village. And you, Jiang, the salt carrier of the day, now walk home as if someone is carrying you. You've paid enough. You haven't been fined. You haven't lost any salt. You haven't been chased by dogs. So it's a successful day, by the standards of those who dare not dream too much. But when you drop the load by the porch, the ache doesn't leave you. You're not carrying salt anymore. You're carrying a damp back, dinner that's not guaranteed. There's only half a boiled potato left from yesterday, rice water, and 3 broken pieces of salt. Jiang plans to make porridge, but your mother says, save it for the kids. We adults are used to being hungry. You nod, but your heart crumbles like earth breaking in a cracked pot, and your elderly mother's gaze waiting without asking anything, because she knows if she asks, you'll cry. People say, work for pay, but you know, carry the salt, your back aches. Pay not seen, only the rice jar getting emptier. Some days, you're paid with a handwritten slip, no seal. It can be exchanged for a bundle of firewood, if the village store is still open. Some days, you get nothing, except the nod of the checkpoint guard. No one says you didn't do enough, it's just, the poor have to get used to not being paid on time. You wash your hands with cold water, water that was used to water plants, cook porridge, and wash clothes. Now it's used to wash off the smell of the poor, a smell that no matter how many times you bathe, still clings to your breath. You sit down on a torn mat. You hear the buzzing of mosquitoes, the croaking of frogs outside the ditch, and the sound of your stomach growling, not because you're hungry, but because you're too used to the silence. Your daughter asks, Dad, are you going again tomorrow? You don't answer, because if you say yes, that child will be sad. If you say no, then the whole family will be hungry. You look at the mark on your shoulder, red like a punishment. They weren't made by anyone's hand, but they hurt like the whole system holding a whip and teaching you the lesson. If you're poor, you have to get used to carrying the weight. You lie down. You once clocked out, poured some water, turned on music, and waited for the hot meal. Jiang only has a torn mat, old water, and a shoulder that doesn't dare touch the ground. The modern person sleeps to rest. Jiang sleeps because there's nothing else left to do. The blanket isn't long enough. The mat isn't wide enough. But you still close your eyes. You don't sleep deeply. Every time you turn, the mark on your shoulder stings like someone reminding you the work isn't done. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night, thinking you've missed the salt delivery. Outside, the wind howls through the thatch roof like a reminder. Others dream of the sea, of the sky. Jiang only dreams of lying still a little longer without being called to wake. Because tomorrow, the salt will need carrying again. And Jiang is the only one left in the house with a living bag. The night in the Han Dynasty wasn't as black as ink. It was dim, like embers that hadn't burned out, and as silent as a sigh that hasn't been released. You don't really sleep. You turn off, like an oil lamp with just a little wick left. No dreams, no tossing and turning, no shifting. Because the moment you move, the pain in your shoulder reminds you, tomorrow you still carry. Outside, the wind howls through the thatched roof. The rooster now crows too early, A mosquito buzzes past your ear, then returns as if it has nowhere else to go. You open your eyes in the dark. There's no oil lamp. Only a burnt-out stick stuck in the ground, kindled with bark fibers, flickering like a drowned firefly. The light can't show you anything, but the warm scent of ash, the smell of damp straw, and the distant sound of a bell, telling you the night is still here. You don't know if it's midnight or near dawn, because in this time, no one has a clock, only an empty stomach to measure time. Your mother coughs softly. Your little daughter wheezes. A musty smell wafts from the wet firewood basket, a mixture of decaying wood and hopes that haven't dried yet. Under the stove, you hear gnawing. Rats. You've seen one sleeping curled up on an old salt sack. You don't chase it away, because sometimes it looks like you, thin, silent, and just needing a place that won't kick you out. You think about tomorrow. Nothing new. Still the same muddy dirt path, still the same 2 salt barrels, still the same repetitive questions from the official like, how many pounds? Any loss? Are you avoiding taxes? As if someone like you could even pull off a trick. Before this, you used to clasp your hands quietly, not to pray to the god of wealth. You're not in business. You pray to something nameless, the ancestor of all the salt carriers. No one taught you how to pray, but when you're poor, anything that stays still becomes sacred. You whisper softly, please don't let it rain tomorrow. Let me carry enough. You once dreamed, not anything big, just one day to stay home, no back pain, and a bowl of hot vegetable soup. But that dream was extinguished, not by a whip, but by the countless times you had to wake up earlier than you wanted. You lie still. Before you drift off, you repeat the familiar questions, like a lullaby of the poor. What's your name? How many pounds? Where are you going? Got a receipt? You don't say them aloud. You just move your lips like an old actor, repeating a role you've known since a past life, because tomorrow will be exactly the same. In this silence, there's one thing that rings loud. You're still alive. And sometimes, that's the only thing you're allowed to carry into the new day. In another time, someone is turning on a podcast at 2 a.m. to lull themselves to sleep. Someone else complains about their broken sleep due to work stress. Jang doesn't stress. Jang just turns off and hopes to turn back on when the sun rises. There are no records of Jang, the salt carrier, no tombstone, no bronze statue, no bamboo scrolls inscribed with, "This is the man who carried 63 kilograms of salt through 3 reigns of emperors without ever asking for leave." You are a blur. If anyone drew a labour map of the Han Dynasty, you'd just be a small line, no name, no colour, no salary scale. You weren't in the 50 names list of the court, not a scholar, not a land-owning farmer, just a person who moves salt from where it's abundant to where it's needed. No one wrote you into history. Bangu's Book of the Han isn't for you. Historians of that time were busy writing about military achievements, taxes, land reclamation policies, and the princess's wedding to the Xiongnu. And you carried salt. If there's anything written about you, it's just a number. Salt transported in the 3rd year of Yuanfeng, a 2% increase from the previous year. That 2% is your role. No one writes you into books. but the salt you carry travels everywhere. In the porridge of the city gate guards, in the pickled vegetables of the old tea cellar, in the steamed buns of the son of the official taking the imperial exams. You're not in the book of the Han, but you're on the tongue of the entire empire. No one remembers your name, but you remember every hill. You know which places are slippery, where the official likes to make trouble, and where the dogs bark for no reason. You know which bucket has a worn bottom, which lid is loose. You know every groan of your shoulders, like a song. No one wants to sing again. If you were allowed to write history, maybe it would just be a list of calluses. Left ankle swollen in the 4th year of Yongping. Ripped coat sleeve in the 2nd year of Yingyuan. Broken yoke in the 6th year of Jianhua. No philosophy, no great sayings. Just existence written in pain. You once wondered, if I die on the road, who will pick up the salt? The answer is the next person. And if that person dies, then the next one. There's no moment of mourning, no trumpet, just 2 dents in the dirt road, saying someone once passed through. You once wondered, will the future ever build a statue of Zhang? A statue of a hunched figure carrying salt, eyes down, shoulders slouched, cracked feet, standing in the middle of the square? No. They don't build statues for those who are passed over. But history, strangely enough, has the smell of salt. Not because it's salty, but because it's carried on the backs of those who are not allowed to be remembered. Zhang didn't leave a scroll, but the salt you carried, it's in every meal, every wound cleaned, every piece of meat preserved through the winter. You're not famous, but someone has lived, thanks to your sweat. And that, maybe, is the only way you still exist. Not in books, but in the blood of the empire. Some people live to 80, hold office for 30 years, leave behind 10 scrolls, but no one remembers their face. You, the one who left nothing, still exist in the salty taste on the tongue, in the pain soothed by salt's cure. You're there, under someone else's skin. Akin Akanind. Aurelia Philometia, a freed slave in Pompeii. You are stepping into a small street in Pompeii, not the street of luxurious villas where aristocrats drink wine in bathtubs inlaid with marble. No, this street is a little dusty, the ground is slightly slanted, and the house you see, it's not big, just a 2-room house, 1 room for sleeping, 1 for selling goods. The Pompeii red plaster on the walls is peeling in places. No mosaics, no hot water taps, just a hand-washing basin and an old oil lamp next to the door. The house stands on the borderline between survival and existence. Not luxurious, but still, it's yours. Just a 2-room house, built with local basalt stone. Wooden doors faded, but there's something unusual. On the wall in front of the door, there's an inscription. In the style of Titulus Pictus, the popular public writing form in Pompeii. It wasn't just for passers-by to read. It was also a quiet declaration. Here, someone once lived. Someone once wanted to be seen. Not crude graffiti. Not advertisements for taverns. In aristocratic villas, they carved the names of gods. Here, Philometia carved her own name. Her name, the name of the woman who lived there. Aurelia Philometia, libertina, cum marito laniario. Aurelia Philometia, freed woman, with her husband the butcher. Short and simple, no flaunting, no decoration, but it's a declaration. In a world where most women weren't even allowed to have their name carved on a tomb, Philomatia carved her name. On the very wall she lived, no historian needed to record her, no Senate approval required. She left herself right on the stone wall for anyone passing by to see. Her husband was a Lanius, a butcher, a slaughterer, a lowly trade but necessary, and not exactly clean. You imagine him every morning, wearing an apron made of leather, carrying his knife, washing his hands with ash and vinegar. And Philomatia, she might be behind the counter, handing meat to customers. She might be handling the books, handling money, or handling everything. Because if you survived slavery, you knew how to navigate through the bustling market and around men shouting louder than the pigs hanging by the door. No one calls them the ideal family. No one writes poetry about them. But every morning, when they open the door, they see their names, not in a slave sale document, but on the very threshold of their home. And maybe, on some afternoon, when the sunlight shines through the inscription, Philomatia stops for a moment, wipes the sweat from her brow, and smiles. Not because today's earnings are much, but because she's still here, in the real world. Early morning in Pompeii. You step out of the house, basket in hand, ready for a day. Not exactly free, but no longer whipped. The air is thick, the smell of ash, sweat, wilting vegetables, and live pigs. You're not a slave, but everyone knows you were, because you're a libertina, a freed woman. Libertina isn't a noble title. It's more like a label. Once a slave, now released. No one calls you a lady, but no one can beat you anymore. In Pompeii, that's felt, not spoken. From the way you fold your shawl, from the fact you don't wear a gold ring like the wife of the rhetoric teacher, from the fact that you don't ride in a litter, but carry meat home yourself, and especially from the gaze of those who were never sold in the marketplace. You enter the market, Macellum. The noise is chaotic, butchers shouting prices, children screaming, someone arguing about being shortchanged. The smell of dried fish, fresh blood, and rotting vegetables mix in the air. Flies gather in clusters on hanging meat. On the ground, water leaks from the small fish baskets, spreading dark patches. You try to step through without soaking your shoes, not because you're afraid of getting dirty, but because you're afraid of falling in front of someone you know. The rough linen shirt sweats just beneath your neck. Your left hand holds the money pouch. Your right hand picks out vegetables. An old woman mutters behind you. Libertina probably doesn't even know how to pick tomatoes. On the other side, there's a whisper. Free now, but still as dirty as before. The words don't cut like a knife, but they still leave a lingering sting in your heart. You don't look back, because you've once washed someone else's feet without being paid. You've once lived behind the stove, eaten last, and slept on the floor. And now, you can choose the tomatoes you want, even if no one smiles at you. You think about your husband, also a freedman. He's chopping meat, his hands covered in blood, grinning with customers. They think he's just a Lanius, a butcher, but they don't know. Every time he washes his hands, he's cleaning the name he carved outside the door. You buy some bread, a few figs, and a pinch of dried salt, a luxury for someone who grew up eating bland meals all their life. And on your way home, you pass by the house of an old noble. He's sitting there drinking white wine on a marble balcony. He has power. You have a broken basket tie, but he can't even hold a piece of bread himself. You, however, can carry goods, cook meals, wear a worn shirt, and still survive. You're a libertina, not a princess, but no longer a slave. And in that noisy, filthy, and crowded market, you lift your head. You once had nothing. Now, you have a name, and that's enough. Night falls in Pompeii. Above the rooftops, the wind weaves through the red tiles, blowing in a soft hiss, as if whispering the secrets of stone and dust. You sit in a small room, not exactly a bedroom, not exactly a workshop, surrounded by rough fabric and iron needles. The needles made from copper, sometimes sharpen bone. The thread is woven from flax or local wool, thick, easily frayed. The oil lamp uses old olive oil, its light dim and yellow, flickering as though it's tired of keeping up with you. A worn basket holds scraps of fabric. A few spools of thread roll on the floor's edge, as if waiting to be called into action. People think you're the wife of the butcher, but you're also the one who mends clothes for the whole street. No one hires you officially. They just ask. Hand you a tattered shirt, a torn scarf, and say, "Just make it neat. I'll pick it up tomorrow." You don't have a sign. You don't have an official title. But everyone remembers you when their trousers tear, their sleeves fray, or their hem comes loose just as they're heading to the temple. There are no posted prices, but every night you sit and mend by the light of the oil lamp and the sound of heavy sighs. Each stitch is a whisper. I was once torn, but I've sewn myself back together. There are some mends you do carefully, and some you leave visible, as if to say, I'm not good at hiding the scars, but I know how to keep them with my hands. Sometimes you mend undergarments for the town's prostitutes. They sit and wait, smoking herbs, while gossiping about rich men who are clean but not so pure. You don't judge. You just quietly thread the needle, because you know women like you, like them, have no armor except the fabric they sew themselves. You sew late into the night. Not because you have a lot of customers, but because in the dark, you feel you have the right to fix something, even if it's small. What's sadder than a life being shaped, yet you don't even hold the needle for your own seams? Now you can choose the thread color, choose the trim, choose whether to keep the cut visible or cover it up. And that's enough. You look up at the cracked wall, your hand still holding the needle, your eyes still red from the smoke, but your lips curve slightly, because you're not mending for someone else. Tonight, you're mending yourself. A normal morning in Pompeii, you wake up before your husband. You start the fire, make a little barley porridge, open the door to let the morning breeze in. The air is warm, but not heavy. The wind from the sea blows in, like it does every day. You think today will just be another hot day, a little tiring, maybe a small argument with the salt vendor. But the sky has a strange color, not red, not blue, not yellow, but ash. Fine ash begins to fall like dust rain. There's no fire, no dragons, no sounds from the sky. It's just a layer of faint dust, clinging to your arm hairs, mixing in your hair and sticking to your mouth, like you've just swallowed dirt. No one understands where it came from, but everyone knows it shouldn't be in the sky like that. There's no explosion. No one screams. Only the elderly step out into the street, look up, as if they're smelling something strange. You think the mountain is trembling again. The mountain is still trembling. A few days ago, the dishes in the kitchen shook slightly. The neighbor says, "It's just a small earthquake." You respond, "Yeah, an earthquake, but why aren't the roosters crowing?" At that moment, you're not scared. You just feel strange, like the sky is about to cry, but it hasn't figured out why yet. By midday, the ash covers the doorstep. Children are coughing. The dust clings to hair, eyes, and food. You have to cover your mouth with a damp cloth, the same cloth you use when butchering meat. Your husband shouts, "Grab the money and the knife. Take anything light you can carry." You're confused. You once thought Pompeii was everything, a city big enough to hide everything, sorrow, secrets, and your name. But the ash falls as if the whole world isn't big enough to hide. You realize some disasters don't need to be named because they will carve themselves into the skin of people. It's not about belongings. It's because in your head, there's no one's name to call, no family, no genealogy, just the name you carved on the wall. And now it's covered in ash. You hold a small bag, not full. Before, you saw the neighbor's little girl, the one who always sings the wrong lyrics and runs barefoot, turning back to the door to get the rag doll. She hugs the doll like it's the whole world, then disappears into the smoke. No one sees her again. It holds needles, thread, and the little scarf the neighbor's daughter asked you to mend yesterday. No one turns back to get it. You leave the house. You don't lock the door, because what's the point of locking it when the whole city will disappear? You run with the crowd. The dust stings your eyes. Children cry. Dogs bark. A man carries his wife and shouts, "To the sea, to the harbor." You look toward Vesuvius, from afar, black, high, and full of smoke. It's like someone is blowing ash into the mouth of the world. No one says goodbye. You don't carry a wedding dress. You don't carry rings or a pin. You only carry memories, like when your husband handed you the torn shirt and said, "Mend this for me. We're going to the festival tomorrow." You'll always remember that tear, because the next day, you never had the chance to return the shirt. No one gets to carry anything but breath and memory. And you, once a slave, once nameless, now you are a speck of dust among thousands of souls. But somewhere on that crumbling wall, there's still the faint inscription, "Aurelia Philometia, Libertina, lived here." That's all. But after 2,000 years, it's more than what thousands of others ever had. Conclusion. Your name can also be a memory. If you're listening to this in the dead of night, when everything is still, and all that's left is the sound of the fan, or the beating of your own heart, slowly and out of rhythm, then know this: Aurelia Philometia once lived. A woman who was once a slave, who loved, who stitched in the dark, who wrote her name on a wall as a quiet declaration that I was here. No one wrote history about her. No one built statues. She didn't fight battles. She didn't make laws. She didn't serve kings. She simply lived like thousands of others and was buried beneath the ashes, but her name remains, and because of that, she never truly disappeared. You too. Your name might not be in the history books, but if someone remembers just one person, or if you yourself want to be remembered, then you're part of humanity's memory. You don't need to do something grand. Just touch someone's life deeply enough so that after you're gone, even if there's only one sentence, one handprint, one scrap of paper, people will still know you were here. As for me, the one telling this story, I'm still awake with you at 2 a.m, not to teach history, just to tell you, there are people who will never be remembered, but you're still here listening, and that's enough to keep a soul alive in this world. Good night. If tomorrow you forget everything I've told you, it's okay. Just don't forget that you lived.